Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special shout out of thanks to some new members of our Patreon family: Linda, Moira, Lynn, and Becky. Thank you all so much for supporting this podcast. By becoming members of Patreon, you help us remain 100% listener supported and ad-free for everyone, and it's very much appreciated. If you're interested in supporting Boring Books for Bedtime and finding out more about the perks available to subscribers, including exclusive episodes, full books, and giveaways found nowhere else, you'll find a link to Patreon in the show description. You'll also find a link to buymeacoffee.com, where you can support us with a one-time tip, no subscription required. I hope you'll take a moment to check them out. Now, let's read and relax. Find a comfortable spot. Adjust your volume. Take a nice deep breath in. Let it out slowly. And off we go. Tonight, let's kick off a brand new year of improved sleep with one of your favorites and mine. We're reading 10 Acres Enough, a practical experience showing how a very small farm may be made to keep a very large family, with extensive and profitable experience in the cultivation of the smaller fruits, by Edmund Morris. First published in 1866 by James Miller, successor to C.S. Francis & Co., 522 Broadway, New York. Let's pick up right where we left off at the beginning of Chapter 12. Let's begin. Chapter 12: Pigs and Poultry, Luck and Ill Luck. Very early after taking possession, I invested $12 in the purchase of 7 pigs of the ordinary country breed. They were wanted to eat the many odds and ends which are yielded by 10 acres, a good garden, and the kitchen. I did not look for much money profit from them, but I knew they were great as architects in building up a manure heap. Yet they were capital things with which to pack a meat tub at Christmas, saving money from the butcher, as well as much running abroad to market. They shared with the cow in the abundant trimmings and surplus from the garden, eating many things which she rejected, and appropriating all the slop from the kitchen. In addition to this, we fed them twice a day with boiled bran, sometimes with a handful of cornmeal, but never upon whole corn. This cooking of the food was no great trouble in the kitchen, but its effect on the pigs was most beneficial. They grew finely, except one which died after 4 months' feeding, but from what cause could not be ascertained. The consequence was that when October came around, the 6 remaining ones were estimated by Dick to average at least 150 pounds each, and were in prime condition for fattening. In the early part of that month, their supply of cooked mush was increased. I am of opinion that farmers leave the fattening of their hogs too late, and that a month on corn before December is worth 3 months after it. By the 10th of December they were ready for the butcher, and on being killed, were found to average 224 pounds, or 944 in all. This being 3 times as much as we needed for home use, the remainder was sent to the store, where it netted me $49. I am quite certain there was a profit on these pigs. They consumed quantities of refuse tomatoes and devoured parsnips with the greatest eagerness. One day I directed Dick to cut up some stalks of our green sweet corn by means of the fodder cutter, which delivers them in pieces half an inch long, and mixed them with bran for the pigs. I found they consumed it with great avidity. Ever after that, they were served twice daily with the same mess. It seemed to take the place of stronger food as well as of grass, and was an acceptable variety. In this way, the money cost of food was kept at a low figure, and the labor we spent on the pigs showed itself in the fine yield of prime pork, which brought the highest price in the market. The yield of rich manure was also very satisfactory, all which, at intervals through the season, was removed from the pen and put under cover. For manure thus housed from the sun and rain is worth about double that which is exposed all the year round. This was another item of profit. If the pigs had not manufactured it, money would have been required to pay for its equivalent. After these 6, I purchased 7 others, some 2 months old, having abundance of roots, offal cabbages, and a stack of the sweet corn fodder on hand. These 7 cost the same as the others, $12. As Dick was found to be a good, trustworthy fellow, he was to be kept all the year round, and as he would be hanging about the barnyard during the winter, when the ground was wet and sloppy, looking after the horse and cow, the pigs would help to fill up his time. The cooking of food for both cow and pigs was a great novelty to him. At first he could not be made to believe in it. When I ventured to insinuate to him that it would be anything but agreeable to him to eat his dinners raw, the force of the idea did not strike him. So much is there in the power of long-established habit. Yet he did condescend to admit that he knew all pigs throve better on plenty of common kitchen swill than on almost anything else. I told him there was but one reason for this, and that was because all such swill had been cooked. When the improvement made by the first lot of pigs became too manifest for even him to dispute, he, together with the pigs, acknowledged the corn and gave in. When outdoor operations for the season were over, Dick undertook the whole business of cooking for the pigs and cow himself. In fact, on one occasion, I succeeded in getting him to curry down both cow and pigs. They all looked and showed so much better for near a week thereafter, that coming on him unexpectedly one day, I found him repeating the operation of his own motion. And so he voluntarily continued the practice during the whole winter. The pigs seemed delighted with the process, and had very little scratching of their own to do. Their backs and sides were kept continually smooth, while their whole appearance was changed for the better. As to the cow, she took to being curried with the best possible grace, and improved under it as much as the pigs. But whether it increased the flow of milk, I cannot say, as no means were taken to solve that question. But as Dick's devotion to the currycomb excited my admiration, so there was abundant evidence that both pigs and cow were equally captivated. This business of raising and carefully attending to only half a dozen hogs is worthy of every small farmer's serious study and attention. The hog and his food, with what is cheapest and best for him, is really one of the sciences. Not an exact one, it is true, but still a science. One must look at and study many things, and they can all be made to pay. The propensity to acquire fat in many animals seems to have been implanted by nature. The hog fattens most rapidly in such a condition of the atmosphere as is most congenial to his comfort, not too hot nor too cold. Hence the months of September, October, and November are the best for making pork. The more agreeable the weather, the less is the amount of food required to supply the waste of life. It has been found by some persons that a clover field is the best and cheapest place to keep hogs in during the spring and summer months, where they have plenty of water, the slop from the house, and the sour milk from the dairy. All sour feed contains more nitrogen than when fed in a sweet state. The first green herbage of the spring works off the impurities of the blood, cleanses the system, renovates the constitution, and enables the animal to accumulate a store of strength to carry it forward to its destined course. Many object to beginning the fattening process so early in the season, as the corn relied on for that purpose is not then fully matured. But taking all things into consideration, it is perhaps better to feed corn before it is ripe, as in that state it possesses more sweetness. Most varieties are in milk in September, when the hogs will chew it, swallow the juice, and eject the dry, fibrous matter. During the growing season of the year, swine can be fed on articles not readily marketable, as imperfect fruit, vegetables, etc. When such articles are used, cooking them is always economical. Most vegetables, when boiled or steamed, and mixed with only an eighth of their bulk of millfield or meal, whey, and milk left to sour, will fatten hogs fast. In this state they will eat it with avidity, and derive more benefit from it than when fed in an unfermented state. Articles of a perishable nature should be used first to prevent waste, as it is desirable to turn all the products of the farm to the best account. Another quite important advantage of early feeding is the less trouble in cooking the food. Convenience of feeding is promoted, as there is no cost nor trouble to guard against freezing. The more you can mix the food, the better, as they will thrive faster on mixed food than when fed separately. In feeding, no more should be given at a time than is eaten up clean, and the feeding should be regular as to time. It is of the greatest importance to get the best varieties, those that are well formed and have an aptitude for taking on fat readily, and consume the least food. As to which is the best kind, there seems to be a great diversity of opinion, some preferring one kind and some another. The Suffolks come to maturity earliest, but others prefer the Berkshires. The pork of both is excellent. They will usually weigh from 250 to 300 pounds at the age of 8 or 10 months. The better way is to have the pigs dropped about the 1st of April and feed well until December and then sell. From a variety of experiments, I am satisfied it is wrong to let a hog remain poor 12 months of his life when he could be made as large in 9 months as he generally is in 15, and I conceive it a great error to feed corn to hogs without grinding. It has been proved by the Shakers, after 30 years' trial, that ground corn is 1/3 better for hogs and cattle feed than if unground. In the case of another feeder, he ascertained the ratio of gain to be even greater than that of the Shakers. Others assert that cooking cornmeal nearly doubles its value. A distinguished agriculturist in Ohio proved that 19 pounds of cooked meal were equal in value to 50 pounds raw. If pigs are well kept for 3 months after being dropped, they cannot be stunted after that, even if the supply of food is less than it should be. It is desirable that hogs should be provided with a dry floor for eating and sleeping only, and the whole pen completely sheltered, to prevent any washing or waste of the manure. The commonwealth of the piggery should be furnished with plenty of straw, potato vines, leaves, sawdust, and the like, with an occasional load of muck, and almost any quantity of weeds, all of which will be converted into the most efficient supports of vegetable life. Hogs are the best composters known, and they delight in upturning any such article as the farmer wishes to convert into manure for the coming year. There can be no question as to its paying to make pork, though men differ on this as widely as their pork differs when brought to market. The poorer the pork, the more the owner complains of his profits, or rather of his losses, and the better the pork, the more is the owner satisfied. There can be no profit in raising a poor breed of hogs that have no fattening qualities, nor even a good breed without conveniences or proper care. A good hog cannot be fatted to any profit in mud or filth, nor where he suffers from cold. His comfort should be consulted as much as that of any other animal. It is a great error to assume that he is naturally fond of living among filth. On the contrary, hogs are remarkably neat, and those which fatten the best always keep themselves the cleanest. One farmer assured me that he had made his corn bring $1.25 per bushel by passing it through the bowels of his hogs, besides having the manure clear. Another did much better by cooking his meal. As no farm is pronounced complete without poultry, and as both my wife and daughters were especially fond of looking after chickens, at least they thought they would be, so to make their new home attractive, I invested $7 in the purchase of a cock and 10 hens. They were warranted to be powerful layers, and would hatch 15 eggs apiece. It struck me that this sounded very large, but on my wife observing it would be only 150 chickens the first season, I gave in without a word. The fact is that chickens were not my hobby. I did not think they would pay, even after hearing my wife dilate on the luxury it would be to have fresh eggs every morning for breakfast, for pies and puddings, and various other things which she enumerated, and as she expressed it, eggs of our own laying. I could not see how this circle of wonders was to be accomplished by only 10 hens, and insinuated that it would be a good thing if she could make a bargain with each of her hens to lay 2 eggs a day. In reply to this, she astonished me by saying that Americans did not know how to make the most of things, but that the French did. She said that a certain Frenchman, mentioning his name, he was either a marquis or count, of course, had recently discovered the art of making hens lay every day by feeding them on horse flesh. She said he had a hennery which furnishes 40,000 dozens of eggs a week, and that it yields the proprietor a clear profit of $5,000 every 7 days. After hearing this, I felt certain she had been reading some modern poultry book, but as she did not speak of requiring me to furnish horse flesh for her pets, nor contemplate the establishment of a fresh-laid egg company, but only suggested the consumption of a little raw meat now and then, I volunteered no objections. Her enthusiasm was such as to make it unsafe to do so. Why should not she and the children be gratified? The hens came home and were put into a cage in the barnyard to familiarize them with their new home. But they did not lay so freely as she had expected, while some did not lay at all. Worse than that, as soon as they let out of their cage, they got over the fence into the garden, where they scratched as violently as if each one had a brood of 15 to scratch for. They made terrible havoc among the young flowers and vegetables, and tore up the beds which had been so nicely raked. One of the girls was employed half her time in driving them out. I thought it too great an expense to raise the barnyard fence high enough to keep them in, and so they were marched back into the cage. It happened to be too small for so many fowls, which my wife did not suspect, until one day, putting her hand in to draw forth a sick hen, she discovered her whole arm and sleeve to be swarming with lice. Here was something she did not remember to have been treated of in her poultry book. But the nuisance was so great, as well as so active, soon extending itself all over her person, as to compel her to strip and change her entire dress, and to plunge the lousy one in a tub of water. I confess the difficulty was a new one to me. My experience in poultry had been limited. My knowledge of them was exclusively anatomical, obtained by frequent dissections with the carving knife. On calling Dick, however, it appeared that he knew more about this trouble than the whole family together. When my wife described her condition to him, and how she had swarmed with the vermin, the fellow laughed outright, but said they wouldn't hurt. He knew all about them, for he had been full of lice more than once. He said he expected this, as the fowls had been kept up too close. They would neither lay, thrive, nor keep clear of vermin unless allowed to run about. But he took the case in hand, clipped their wings, saturated their heads with lamp oil, provided abundance of ashes for them to roll in, and then turned them loose in the barnyard. He then obtained poles of sassafras wood for them to roost on, as he said the peculiar odor of that tree would drive the enemy away. I presume his prescriptions answered the purpose. At all events, we discovered no more hen lice, because the whole family were careful never to touch a fowl again. I think this little catastrophe took all the romance out of my wife touching chickens. I rarely heard her mention eggs afterwards, except when some of us were going to the store for other things, and she was careful never to purchase chickens with the feathers on. She never referred to the 150 she was to hatch out that season, nor have I ever heard her even mention horseflesh as a sure thing for making hens lay all the year round. That winter Dick fattened and killed the whole lot. My wife did not seem to have much stomach for them when they came upon the table. I was not sorry for it, except that she had been disappointed. Her knowledge of keeping poultry had been purely theoretical, and her first disappointment had completely weaned her of her fondness for the art. But this brief and unlucky experience of ours should by no means operate to discourage others. Money is undoubtedly made by skillful men at raising poultry. It cannot be a losing business, or so many thousand tons would not be annually produced. Volumes have been written on the subject, which all who contemplate embarking in the business may consult with profit. As an incident of farm life, it will always be interesting, and with those who understand the art, it ought to be profitable. Foreigners must be more experienced in the business of raising poultry than Americans, judging by the vast quantities they annually produce for market. The quantity imported into England is so enormous that it is impossible to determine the amount. Into only 2 of the principal London markets, there is annually brought from France and Belgium 75 million eggs, 2 million fowls, 400,000 pigeons, 200,000 geese and turkeys, and 300,000 ducks. In addition to these, the large amounts sent to poulterers and private houses must be considered. The Brighton Railroad alone carries yearly 2,600 tons of eggs, which come from France and Belgium. Yet with all these immense supplies, the London markets are frequently very meagerly supplied with butter and eggs. The trade is shown by these figures to be one of great national value. Americans have strangely neglected its cultivation with the method and precision of foreigners. We can raise food more cheaply than they, while none of them can boast of possessing our incomparable Indian corn. There are several of my neighbors who are highly skilled in the art of raising poultry. One of them is quite a poultry fancier, and by keeping only choice breeds, he realizes fancy prices for them. Another confines his fowls in a plum orchard, and thus secures an annual crop of plums without being stung by the curculio. In general, the female portion of the family attend to this branch of domestic business, and realize a snug sum from it annually. A brood of young chickens turned into a garden, the hen confined in her coop, will soon clear it of destructive insects. Chapter 13. City and Country Life Contrasted. The pensive reader must not take it for granted that in going into the country we escaped all the annoyances of domestic life peculiar to the city, or that we fell heir to no new ones such as we had never before experienced. He must remember that this is a world of compensations, and that nowhere will he be likely to find either an unmixed good or an unmixed evil. Such was exactly our experience, but on summing up the two, the balance was decidedly in our favor. It is true that though the town close by us had well-paved streets, yet the walk of half a mile to reach them was a mere gravel path, which was sometimes muddy in summer, and sloppy with unshoveled snow in winter. But I walked over it almost daily to the post office, not even imagining that it was worse than a city pavement. The tramp of the children to school was not longer than they had been used to, and my wife and daughters thought it no hardship to go shopping among the well-supplied stores quite as frequently as when living in the city. Indeed, I sometimes thought they went a little oftener. They were certainly as well posted up to the new fashions as they had ever been, while the fresh country air united with constant exercise kept them in good appetite, even to the rounding of their cheeks and the maintenance of a better color in them than ever. As to society, they very soon made acquaintances quite as agreeable as could be desired. Visiting became a very frequent thing, and after a few months I let in a suspicion that the girls found twice as many beaux as in the city, though there the average number is always larger than in the country. On throwing out an insinuation of this kind to Kate one summer evening, after a large party of young folks had concluded their visit, she made open confession that it was so, and volunteered her conviction that they were decidedly more agreeable. I admit this confession did not surprise me, as there was one young man among the party who had become especially attentive to Kate, bringing her the new magazines as soon as they were out, sundry books and pictorials, and always having a deal to say to her, with a singular genius for getting her away from the rest of the company, so that most of their mysterious small talk could be heard by none but themselves. Another remark which I made to Kate on a subsequent occasion, touching this subject, covered her bright face with so many blushes that I ventured to mention the whole matter to my wife. But she made so light of the thing that I said no more at the time, thinking perhaps that the women were most likely the best judges in such cases. But I have since discovered that my prognostications were much more to be depended on than hers. Then the walks for miles around us were excellent, and we all became great walkers, for walking we found to be good, not merely stepping from shop to shop, or from neighbor to neighbor, but stretching away out into the country, to the freshest fields, the shadiest woods, the highest ridges, and the greenest lawns. We found that however sullen the imagination may have been among its griefs at home, here it cheered up and smiled. However listless the limbs may have been by steady toil, here they were braced up, and the lagging gait became buoyant again. However stubborn the memory may be in presenting that only which was agonizing, and insisting on that which cannot be retrieved, on walking among the glowing fields, it ceases to regard the former and forgets the latter. Indeed, we all came to esteem the mere breathing of the fresh wind upon the commonest highway to be rest and comfort, which must be felt to be believed. But then we had neither gas nor hydrant water, those two prime luxuries of city life. Yet there was a pump in the deep well under a shed at the kitchen door, from which we drew water so cold as not at any time to need that other sitting luxury, ice. It was gratifying to see how expertly even the small children operated with the pump handle. In a month we ceased to regret the hydrants. As to gas, we had the modern lamps, which give so clear a light, not so convenient it must be confessed, but then they did not cost us over half as much. Neither did we sit up near so long at night. There were 2 mails from the city daily, and the newsboy threw the morning paper into the front door while we sat at breakfast. The evening paper came up from the city before we had supped. We had 2 daily mails from New York, besides a telegraph station. The baker served us twice a day with bread when we needed it. The oysterman became a bore, he rang the bell so often, and the fish wagon, with sea fish packed in ice directly from the shore, was within call as often as we desired. with fish as cheap and sound as any to be purchased in the city. Groceries and provisions from the stores cost no more than they did there, but they were no cheaper. But in the item of rent, the saving was enormous, really half enough in my case to keep a moderate family. Many's the time when sweating over the weeds have I thought of this last heavy drain on the purse of the city toiler, and thanked heaven that I had ceased to work for the landlord. We had books as abundantly as aforetime, as we retained our share in the city library and became subscribers to that in the adjoining town. It is true that the road in front of us was never thronged like Chestnut Street, but we neither sighed after the crowd nor missed its presence. We saw no flash of jewelry, nor heard the rustling of expensive silks, except the few which on particular occasions were sported within our own unostentatious domicile. Our entire wardrobes were manifestly on a scale less costly than ever. Our old city friends were apparently a great way off, but as they could reach us in an hour either by steamboat or rail, they quickly found us out. The relish of their society was heightened by distance and separation. In short, while far from being hermits, we were happy in ourselves. I think my wife became a perfectly happy woman, what it had been the great study of my wedded life to make her, the very sparkle and sunshine of the house. She possessed the magic secret of being contented under any circumstances. The current of my life had never been so dark and unpropitious that the sunshine of her happy face, falling across its turbid course, failed to awake an answering gleam. Speaking of visitors from abroad, I noticed that our city friends came to make their visits on the very hottest summer days, when, of all others, we were ourselves sufficiently exhausted by the heat, and were disposed to put up with as little cooking and indoor work as possible. But as such visitations were not exactly comfortable to the visited, so we could not see how they could be any more agreeable to the visitors. Yet they generally remarked, even when the mercury was up to 95, how much cooler it is in the country. They did really enjoy either themselves or the heat, but my wife told me it was only the change of scene that made the weather tolerable, and that if they lived in the country, they would soon discover it to be quite as hot as in the city. For my part, I bore the heat admirably, but I enjoyed the inexpressible luxury of going constantly in my shirt sleeves. I can hardly find words to describe the feeling of comfort which I enjoyed for full 7 months out of the 12 from this little piece of latitudinarianism, the privilege of country life, but an unknown luxury in the city. I saw that this press of company in the very hottest weather imposed an unpleasant burden on my wife, for she and my 2 oldest daughters were the sole caterers, and I intended to say something to her concerning it as soon as a large party, then staying several days with us, should have concluded their visit. But on going into our chamber that very evening, she surprised me by asking if I could tell her why, when Eve was made from one of Adam's ribs, there was not a hired girl made at the same time, for to her mind it took 3 to make a pair, he, she, and a hired girl. I replied that I had not given much time to the study of navigation, but that I quite understood her meaning, and that it was exactly what I had myself been thinking of. If Adam's rib, after producing Eve, had not held out to produce a hired girl also, I told her there was a much quicker way of getting what she wanted, and that the first morning paper she might pick up would produce her 20 hired girls. In this way, before the summer was over, I procured her a servant, thus making her little establishment complete. For this luxury we paid city wages, but this was a small item when I saw how much her presence relieved my wife. After that, I do not think she complained quite as much of the hot weather, nor was she inclined so frequently to repeat her former observation that the sultry days always brought the most company. Indeed, I am certain that on 1 or 2 occasions, when the dog days were terribly oppressive, she prevailed on different parties to prolong their stay for nearly a week. Now, this taking on of Betty did not imply that my daughters were to be brought up to do nothing, or to do everything that is fashionable imperfectly. My wife had already educated them in domestic duties, not merely to marry, to go off with husbands in a hurry and afterwards from them. To the 2 eldest she had taught a trade, and they were both able to earn their salt. They could not only dress themselves, but knew how to make their dresses and bonnets, and all the clothing for the younger children. She cultivated in them all that was necessary in the position in which they were born, one thing at a time, but that thing in perfection, so that if parents were impoverished, or if in after life reverses should overtake themselves, they might feel independent in the ability to earn their own support. She frowned upon the senseless rivalries of social life as destructive of morals, mind, and health, and imbued their spirits with a devout veneration for holy things. She taught them no worship of the almighty dollar, but sound, practical economy, the art of saving the pieces. Surely it must be education alone which fills the world with 2 kinds of girls, one kind which appears best abroad, good for parties, rides, and visits, and whose chief delight is in such things, good, in fact, for little else. The other is the kind that appears best at home, graceful in the parlor, captivating in social intercourse, useful in the sick chamber as in the dining room, and cheerful in all the precincts of home. They differ widely in character. One is often the family torment, the other the family blessing. One, a moth consuming everything about her, the other a sunbeam, inspiring life and gladness all along her pathway. As my wife embodied in herself all that to me appeared desirable in woman, so she possessed the faculty of transfusing her own virtues into the constitution of her daughters. And with that ringing endorsement and the end of chapter 13, I think we'll end this evening's reading from 10 Acres Enough by Edmund Morris, which continues to be a bevy of information and observation. I hope you enjoyed that. If you'd like to read this work for yourself, as always, you'll find a link to a free ebook from Project Gutenberg in the show description. If you'd like to connect, suggest a boring book you'd like to hear read, or request more from one we've already started, you can drop me an email via our website, www.boringbookspod.com. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me for this evening's reading. Until our next boring book, good night.